Long the people have been fooled while the House of Lords have ruled.
After the 1906 election, the Liberal Party were elected on a huge landslide victory over their main rivals, the Conservative Party. They had a transformative manifesto, promising the foundations of Britain's modern welfare state. National insurance, unemployment benefits, sickness pay, free healthcare for children, school meals, old age pensions, workplace injury compensation, and the whole thing would be paid for by the wealthy aristocracy. This was known as the People's Budget. But of course, the wealthy aristocracy were not happy with having to pay for all of that free stuff. Lucky for them, they had a trick up their sleeve. While the Liberals held the House of Commons, it was the Conservatives who held the majority in the House of Lords. Remember those guys? Yeah, the Tories from earlier are called the Conservatives now, get used to it. The Liberal Party were proposing this budget in the Commons, which meant it had to pass through the Conservatives in the Lords. So every time the People's Budget passed the Commons, the Lords would simply reject it. So the Liberals drew up another law, the Parliament Act. This act would put limits on how often the House of Lords could reject legislation. 3 times, and then the Commons can bypass them, going straight to the King for approval. Predictably, the Lords said no. This set off a crisis in government. Who should hold the power? The people who own the country, or the people who live in it? To prove that they had popular backing, the Liberals called not 1 but 2 elections in 1910, which they narrowly won both. But the Lords refused to budge. Eventually, King George V had to step in. If you do not pass this law, I will appoint tons of new Liberal Lords who will overpower you and never allow you to veto any laws ever again. This was the first time that a monarch had played an active role in politics in over 200 years. And we all know what happened the previous 2 times. So it was serious. This was enough to scare the Lords into submission, and they approved both the Parliament Act and the People's Budget. From now on, the elected Commons, the House to represent the ordinary people, are more powerful than the unelected Lords. Today, the Lords cannot veto any proposed laws more than 3 times, and can't oppose anything that the government proposed in the last election. Most of their work today focuses on scrutinising the work of the government and recommending improvements to the law, which of course the Commons are free to ignore. But it's incredibly boring, which is why you hardly ever see footage of the Lords' Chamber in the news. There is one exception. They can reject any proposed law that delays or cancels an upcoming election to the Commons. That way, if a fascist political party ever gets in power and tries to ban democracy, it is, ironically, the undemocratic House of Lords who can stop them in their tracks. Speaking of elections, at the time of this whole Parliament kerfuffle, only men who owned property were allowed to vote. Wouldn't it be nice if some of their other property were allowed to vote too? One common argument against women being allowed to vote was that their vote could only ever double or negate her husband's vote, so it was either giving a man a second vote or making it worthless. Another argument was that women would eventually demand multiple votes in case they wanted to change their mind on polling day, because they couldn't make up their mind, which is totally wrong, but I can get why they think that would happen. However, the main argument was simple enough. There is the public sphere and the private sphere. If you cross the two, the whole of society will collapse. At the time, there were 2 main groups campaigning for women's suffrage in the UK. The suffragists was the name given to members of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, led by Millicent Fawcett. These were just regular campaigners for women's suffrage and were the larger group. Membership was open to women and men, and their activities mostly revolved around petitions and lobbying and peaceful marches and so on. But the suffragettes, which you're probably more aware of, was a derogatory term for members of the Women's Social and Political Union. This isn't some People's Front of Judea type situation. The 2 groups were really quite different. The WSPU was for women only and led by Emmeline Pankhurst and her 3 daughters, who were all pretty much complete lunatics. Instead of lame marches and boring posters, the suffragettes were a bit more hands-on than their suffragist counterparts. They did things like setting fire to post boxes, smashing up shop windows, throwing rocks at politicians, vandalizing priceless paintings with knives, defacing currency, chaining themselves to the gates of Parliament, and many more things. At one point they even blew up the house of Chancellor David Lloyd George, even though he supported women's suffrage, so I don't know what they were thinking there. This woman threw herself under a horse and died. Whoa. When they were inevitably arrested for their militant tactics, many of the suffragettes went on hunger strike in protest, and that wasn't going to last long because scores of dead women in prison make the government look bad. Many prison governors instituted a policy of force feeding by tying down the prisoner and inserting a tube into their nose and down their throat, then cracking an egg down that tube so they wouldn't starve. Yummy. And would you believe this was even worse PR for the government? Wow. What a shocker. So next, the government devised the so-called Cat and Mouse Act, a new law where being a hunger striker got you released from prison. And then when you get home and have a meal, the police will come to your house and rearrest you and then take you back to prison to serve the rest of your sentence. And if you went on hunger strike again, they'd just keep doing it again and again and again and again. In the first 8 weeks of the war, 750,000 men had signed up to join the army and were promptly shipped out to France, leaving a massive hole in the workforce. To prove themselves just as capable as men, the suffragettes suspended all violent activity to focus on winning the war. The Pankhursts might have been lunatics, but they were patriotic lunatics. They took up factory work while the men were away fighting on the front lines, which completely shattered the argument that the two societal spheres should stay separate. But despite this, the suffragettes didn't give up their rebellious streak. The Women's Social and Political Union attempted to drive up recruitment to the army by harassing non-uniformed men in the street and handing out white feathers, a symbol for cowardice. At the end of the war, the men in government realised that women were indeed just as capable as men and granted all women the right to vote, provided they were over the age of 30. It was lowered to 21, the same as men, in 1928. The first group of women who exercised this new right to vote was actually on the tiny Scottish island of St Kilda, who, on the day after the Act was passed, participated in the daily meetings held by the village elders for the first time. Ah, that's cute. As you no doubt will have noticed, many of the rights guaranteed by these previous documents are quite patchy and come with many asterisks. Freedom of speech, for members of Parliament. The right to own a gun, for Protestants. Votes for women, over 30. But this next document will try and fix all of that, as the most comprehensive list of liberties in all of our 1,000-year history. Before 1998, UK citizens who thought their rights were being trampled on had to go all the way to the European Court of Human Rights if they wanted to challenge the government. Before the UK signed the European Convention in 1950, if a right wasn't on the rule books, it wasn't safe from abuse. After their landslide victory in 1997, the Labour Party introduced the Human Rights Act, finally putting into law all the rights and liberties of the common man. Anyone who thinks their freedom is being stamped on can use this document in court for a powerful one-stop guide to their ancient liberties. It is essentially just a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as written by the United Nations, but this time with full legal force instead of just being an advisory. The Act codifies rights to dignity, liberty, equality, free movement, free association, free speech, property laws, citizenship laws, religious liberty, healthcare, privacy, fair trials, democracy, and education. It's all there. 800 years of struggle for human rights neatly culminated in one single buttery document covering the whole slice of toast. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. Now, disputes can be heard in a UK courtroom instead of going to the costly and bureaucratic European court. Of course, this Act and all the other acts are not untouchable or immune from abuse. Parliament has the power to do whatever it wants because legally it gets its power from the monarch, who supposedly gets it from God. Declaring the right to free speech is fine, but in one afternoon Parliament can pass an act watering that down or striking it out of existence entirely. Which, by the way, the Conservative Party are planning to do right now, so maybe this section won't even apply in the near future. Maybe it's time to make this constitution official, one that is above Parliament and cannot be changed without popular approval. It doesn't have to be an all-powerful, untouchable document like the Yanks have it, but it should be a merged PDF of all of our key legislation into one document, then adopted with a nationwide referendum, approval by all devolved governments, and a strong majority in Parliament. I think that's fair. We should probably get on this now rather than later, because we're entering a period of big uncertainty that could determine the direction of human history, and while the UK ranks highly on the list of countries most likely to survive the apocalypse, that doesn't mean your civil liberties are going to come out the other side intact. So fight for your ancient rights, fight back against tyranny, and ensure that, as former Justice Secretary Jack Straw said, the Constitution of the United Kingdom exists in hearts and minds and habits as much as it does in law.